Hello, you're listening to Tony Slattery's Rambling Club, and you're most welcome.
Well, it's Friday, it's 5 to 5, and that means that the doors to Tony Slattery's Rambling Club are open once again. Hello everyone, my name is Paul Carmichael.
I'm Arnold Liv.
And you are welcome to the Rambling Club. We're just sorting out through some of Tony's old knickknacks, aren't we, Al? From back in the day when I think he used to do a certain amount of work behind the bar, didn't he?
He did, that's right. And he's got a whole pile of the old newspapers that they used to have in the pub for the punters. Some classic headlines here. The Daily Mail, hurrah for the black shirts. That's always a favourite.
Well, I mean, he was quite a collector of these things, wasn't he? So we're just going through these and we're sorting them out, and hopefully we're not... Oh, door. Do you want to get that, Al, and see who it is this time?
Yeah, certainly. Hello, can I help?
Yeah, I'm just on the hunt, if that doesn't sound too sinister, for an old mate of mine.
Oh,
Tony.
Tony.
He's an ex-colleague. We used to work behind the bar together, quite briefly, but memorably. At Mar Edgerton's, and I was just... Someone told me that someone in here might be able to give me some info about his whereabouts, or fill me in.
Well,
Yeah, he used to speak very fondly of his time at Mar Edgerton's when the stage doors would open and all the proper actors would pour in.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The theatricals, he used to call them.
that's the ones, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Tony went to the loo. Well, it's about 5 months ago now, didn't he, Al? So we've not seen him since. But I mean,
Oh, yeah, that'll be him. Yeah, that's definitely him. then.
that's him. That's it. He's always doing
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But
Yeah, they used to do that back in the day. Yeah,
But I got a moment. Is this Paul McGann?
Yeah, it is.
Paul. Well, welcome. I mean, do come into the shed. You're more than welcome to pop in with us. But Tony.
Thank you very much. Jeez, it's big on the inside, isn't it?
Tony's in the West Wing at the moment, in the labs. So I'm afraid we can't do much about that. We've been trying to prise him out of there for some time now without much success. Well, we wouldn't want you to have a wasted journey. So what we normally do, myself and Alan, at this time on a Friday, is we give the bingo machine a bit of a spin, just to keep it all oiled up and in good working order. And then we have a little bit of a ramble. Would you be interested in coming with us, maybe?
I'm your man.
Oh, perfect.
Wonderful.
Spin that machine.
Let's give her a whirl and see where we end up. Off we go.
Tony's enchanted bingo machine. A curious contraption of cogs, levers, and glowing buttons that hums with ominous energy. This machine generates 3 completely random numbers. These numbers are fed directly into the Dewey Decimal System, the arcane reference system by which books and their contents are categorized. In this way, the bingo machine conjures from thin air a topic of conversation so enthralling, so wildly unexpected, that it leaves the members of the Rambling Club both bewildered and vaguely excited. Thus, another evening is saved from the brink of boredom, thanks to Tony's marvellous, possibly haunted and entirely inexplicable bingo machine.
This reminded me of watching. A few months back, I was sitting with my kids and banging on about something. And anyway, I said to them, listen to me, I sound like Alf Garnett. And of course, both kids went, who's that? Not a clue. Which was a kind of shock. So seconds later, I was YouTubing. You can pick episodes up of, from the mid-60s of Till Death Us Do Part. My kids were gobsmacked. Both of the quality of, anyway, just the weirdness of Alf Garnett's. But one of the episodes was a Christmas episode. They were masterpieces. These things would go out sometimes to 20 million people. They were little, weekly Beckett plays. Anyway, and one of them, he goes down, Dandy Nichols sends him down the pub while she gets the dinner together, and it's full of actors. It's full of theatricals. You probably saw it. Remember, and at one point he ends up in the West End. There's a production of Jesus Christ Superstar, and there's Paul Nicholas.
Paul Nicholas, isn't it? Paul Nicholas turns up in the club. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
And he brings them all back to the house. Suddenly they're his mates.
wonderful. Love that.
There is new friends, all the theatricals. Bless him. Anyway, off Garnet. Bless his memory.
Well, here we are in the great outdoors, ready to begin our first ramble with our guest president this week, Paul McGann. And the numbers selected for us for our first ramble are
3, 9, 1.
391, 391. And that means that the first subject for us to ramble about is costume and personal appearance. Costume and personal appearance. So, do clothes maketh the man, I suppose, is the question. Well, obviously, as an actor, Paul, costume is extremely important to you. Do you find that really does add something that you maybe are lacking if, say, you do radio or something like that?
Tell you what, I mean, on occasion I go to these these weekend fan shows, these convention things. I don't do many, but the ones I go to I really like, and the big deal about them, the real spirit of them, is the cosplayers. Usually at the bigger ones there's a kind of competition, or over 2 days people arrive. They come on public transport usually, dressed to the nines. And there's a competition, and at the end of it, someone gets a prize. But sat there with sometimes 1,000 people, all dressed up, always makes me think the same thing. Why don't we dress up more often? We're way too casual. People look fantastic. They act different. They mingle differently. They feel better. It's a confidence thing. I'm always impressed with them. I mean, at a lot of these shows, people make their own gear. Some of it's really imaginative. But anyway, the point being, and even now, like looking at pictures, as there's a few big birthdays in the family just happened, and we got the photos out, and even pictures from 30, 40 years ago, or particularly ones when we were kids, when we just dressed better, or maybe I'm just being romantic, but clothes seem to be proper clothes rather than the mass-produced tat that we tend to go for these days. Anyway, that's the point. I've forgotten what your question is, but it's the feeling is anyway that clothes cheer us up. They make us better. I went to a school where I don't know where I stand on school uniform. Except that I went to a school with a uniform, and the kids were always trying to sort of modify. I know the arguments made for it, was that it's a leveler and everything else. Fair enough. But even at school, you probably, if you went to a school with a uniform yourself, you probably tried to. Your little rebellion was to either change this or that, or modify this and that. And I've spoken to it.
Wear the tie in a funny way or something.
Exactly right. Your little thing. I remember speaking to I remember the very first. What would that have been? The very first World War I veteran I ever met. We were shooting this thing back in the 80s. Big thing for the BBC. And halfway through, we shot this scene which had taken place. It was it had actually happened back in 1917. And anyway, one of the fellows who was part of this thing in France at the time was still alive. And he came. He was there on the set. And while we shot a scene from his life from 70 years ago, it's just kind of great in its way. But anyway, we're all along. There we all are in these BBC costumes, all dressed as ratings and squaddy kids, from the period. And I remember because it was 2 a.m, he came along this bridge and he inspected us all. His name was James Davis, and literally we were going to shoot this half-hour, sequence from an episode from his young life. He was about 90 years old, and now he's going along the line. And he's saying to us, and of course, I know the costume people are walking behind him with their notebooks, as it was in them days, or their Polaroids. And And he's saying, yeah, that's about right. He said, but no, he said, we wouldn't have done that. We would have skewed it a bit. We would have modified it. But even then, even in the army, you would have tried to, you sort of took possession of even this serge uniform that they gave you.
Yeah.
And tried to make it your own kind of thing. I remember that.
Yeah. My granddad.
So I think that's the point.
Yeah. My granddad was someone who very much sort of believed that clothes did make the man, and he would not leave the house, no matter what time of year it was. He wouldn't leave the house without his hat, or his bonnet, as he called it. So it was the hat, the tie, the shirt, always cleanly shaved. And he lived till about 1992, I think, but he believed that you had to have a certain standard of dress. And that never altered.
Oh yeah, but tell me that's not true. It's kind of, you've only got to see the photographs from the days when everybody wore hats.
Yeah.
Or the film sequences, it's kind of amazing. I've honestly, one of my brothers he gets away with a hat. Joe, he wears a hat rather well. And Joe's very tall, imposing, and he kind of gets away with it. I've tried. The McGanns have got big heads. I've got this, I'm about 5'9", quite sort of lean, but I got this big head, got this big old McGann head which we've inherited. So if I'm not careful, like one of those little models you used to get in garages, with the head would wobble a little bit. Anyway, so if I put a hat on, it just looks kind of ridiculous. But I'm slightly bitter about it because I'd love to have been one of those people that kept hats, went out in a hat, hid behind a hat. It's just another little bit of, it's a bit of armor. I got this, from back in the day, I was doing a picture, and we were sent to a tailor in the West End, a guy called John Pierce. John was a filmmaker himself, and in the 60s had been part of Granny Takes a Trip. Granny's was the place where everybody went. Hendrix got his clothes there. The Beatles were dressed at the Stones. It was the place, and John was part of that. John still works. He's still got an outlet. He's still got a shop in Mead Street. Anyway, John, I met him then, and he's made stacks of stuff for me since. But he always says the same thing. He says, "It's your armor. It's your armor. It's important." So he says, "Come on in." He said, "Pick your armor. Pick." The lovely thing about buying clothes or clothes, having stuff made for you, is that, of course, you're there from the beginning. You pick the stuff. You pick the material. You watch. You're there. It's like being an actor. You get fittings, and you go back and get your armor. Yeah. But that's also, I think it's to the point. It's what we're talking about. It's important. It does make you. It makes you because you can perhaps pretend. We all know that part of the reason most of us became actors is just for the dressing up bit. Yeah. That's the buzz. The minute you get the gear on, it's a leap. You're halfway there. Whatever point in rehearsals that happens, you get the gear on. You might just get the shoes on, or whatever, and then you start to move differently. Maybe then the voice changes. That's how it works.
Yeah, Beryl Reid, I think. Beryl Reid said that it was the shoes that did it for her. Once she'd found the shoes, she found the character, but she had to have the right shoes. So she would work barefoot until she found the character's shoes. And then there's the character. And then she explained, well, it's the walk. The walk is the character, and the walk comes from the shoes. So she was absolutely, the costume was the key thing for her all the time. Wonderful.
Costume's important.
Kind of like the thing David Suchet did with Poirot, isn't it? Yeah, where he held a pound coin between his buttocks when he was rehearsing Poirot, so that he'd get the walk right.
Yeah, and I worked on a couple, and he never said as much, but he'd sort of dare you to laugh while he did it. He never came out of character, even at he's famous for it. You'd sit with him at lunchtime, and he was still at this Belgian accent, and he would get the gear. That's how some actors do it. It's everything. Again, it's something you can hide behind, and again, one of the jammy things about being little and skinny like me was that when particularly working on costume dramas, was that usually it was nearly always the BBC, the B had access often to original things. You might do a 19th century thing, or even sometimes even earlier, and there'd be this, Angels, whoever it was, whichever company it was, they could find some of the original gear from when people were littler and skinnier, and sometimes it would fit. So that was always nice. Sometimes you'd wear genuine bits of clothing, and that felt lovely. Not only that as well, but sometimes the underclothing, with the Victorian things, because it's just a thing. Well, why?
I suppose that would work though, doesn't it? Because if you think about even sort of the underclothing, when you think about the Victorians and that sort of stiff morality, so if you've got the correct gear on, then it probably helps you to adapt to that mindset a lot more easily, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much detail you need, but fellas tended to tuck their long shirt, just the shirt tail would go under your nethers. That's how it, or at least that's what they said to me when I wore that. That's how they did it. Yeah, no undies.
Wow.
It tended to be that, yeah.
Out of the shower.
I did not know that. I would have assumed that they were
there you
to the
go.
nine.
Today hasn't been wasted.
Absolutely not. So in terms of clothing in general, I mean, do you feel that just when you're not acting, Paul, is it important to you to look right on an average day as well, or are you much more casual?
I'm pretty casual. I wish I were more confident. Because again, there's a confidence aspect to it, isn't it? Right. It either gives you confidence, but first you need the confidence to make the little leap to find yourself a costume that you're happy with. I wish I was a bit more confident. Right. Again, my big brother dresses beautifully, and I'm slightly envious. He's got a good eye. When we were kids, before I was an actor and he was an actor, we worked in shops when we were first in London, and we sold clothes, sold shoes, and Joe was really good at it. I learned from him. It's one of them things, you can sell stuff, you can probably be an actor. Like they say, you can tell a joke, you can be an actor. If you're good at retail, you can probably be an actor as well. Anyway, we did that. We worked in these shops, but Joe was always had a good eye for other people as well, not just for himself. Right. And he still does. He still sends me little links. He's still 40, 50 years later. He's still dressing me on the side. He said, no, not that. He said, no, that. He said, that looks terrible. He said, no, have that. Here's another link, sort of thing. So he's looking after me like a big brother should.
It's kind of part of the rite of passage when you go to university as well. If you go to university, isn't it? Is picking your look, because you kind of reinvent. You go away and suddenly nobody knows you. You can be whoever you like, and it's a bit like an act going into a wardrobe and going, "Oh, right, who am I? I'll have this, and that's me." Yeah,
and even from your school days, even before uni, you got used to sort of deciding the little clique or the gang or the couple of people or whatever it was that you wanted to attach yourself to, often for protection, and dress like them. It was hardly ever, I don't know about you, but it was I hardly ever, I don't remember having, what's the word, the agency, the just the confidence to stick out. There were some kids, and again, I was always slightly envious of them. The kids who would wear exactly what they wanted to wear, they wouldn't mind the ridicule. And in the end, even the bullies in the school would go, fair play. They'd sort of leave them alone. There was a way of, clothes were a way of, again, it's armor. It was a way of kind of just making sure you were all right. But for the rest of us, we sort of followed the crowd a little bit, didn't we? That was in, this wasn't in. If you were at school like I was in the 70s, things seemed each 6 months or 7, or 12, or each year, things seemed to change. What was in last year seemed to be just gone. I was one of my mates at school lived near the prison in Liverpool, near Walton Prison, and he used to say how they'd sit in the bay window of his mum and dad's house and they'd watch the back end of the prison there, usually fellas getting let out, they would have done a short sentence and they were getting, once a week they'd let them out. And often they'd laugh, because these lads were dressed in clothes from 2 years ago, say, or which now looked ridiculous, and they'd have to sprint to the bus or jump into a cab, with the wrong sorts of flares on or whatever it was. Anyway, you can picture it, you know what I mean? So even at that level, you could get caught out. Anyway, but school was like that. School was your, well, it was literally your education, but it was, you learn to defend yourself and learn how to join in, But you're right, uni, I don't know, I never went to uni, I went to a drama school, but it felt the same there, so you were meeting kids from all over the country and kids from North America and, some of them really well dressed and just trying to do your own thing. I went to a drama school in the middle of London in '79. And me and Joe had been working, like I said, we'd been working in these shops. In those days, at the end of the '70s, it was blue jeans, it was Jean Machine, Jean Junction, those kind of, it was still a lot of, double denim, it was still that period. And, but also around that time, word got around the shops that we were working in that there was a fella, and although he was American, he was coming in from Denmark, and it all sounded really shady because he can't go back to New York because the mafia. It was this. Anyway, this story got around. Anyway, this fella's going to arrive in London, and he's going to bring a load of gear with him that no one's got, and he's looking for lads to work in his shop, and blah blah. Anyway, and guess what? He's going to pay you 100 quid a week. And we went, shut up. Nobody pays that. That's almost double what we were on. It was all true. This guy arrives, and for a while, and he opened this eventually, after we started in a warehouse, but he opened the thing called Flip. And Flip, I think I'm right in saying, probably kicked off and finished the retro boom. On the telly in those days, in the '70s, there was this program called Happy Days. It was this really successful thing set in the '50s, but made in the '70s. So it was a kind of weird, and the Fonz and all that, obviously set in 56, 57, 58, but made at the end of the '70s. So there was this sort of romantic thing, this already a period piece. Anyway, this guy Wolf. His name was Paul Wolf, and he had this idea that what he'd do is he must have seen the program as well, and anyway, he puts two and two together, and he basically scours most of North America, finding all this gear, this 50s clobber, and he collects it all, and he brings it into Britain, and he opens these shops and sold it, and it took about 2 years for him to sell it, and we worked in this. And why am I telling you this? Why? Because working in the outlets, there was a shop in King's Road. There was the warehouse was in Old Street when Old Street was still quiet. Little shop there, and then there was a shop in Longacre in Covent Garden, which I'd work. Even when I was at the drama school, I was working on the Saturday in there. But Wolf would encourage you to wear the gear. If you're going to work in the shop, put the gear on. And some of this gear. Because these canvas bales would arrive off an aircraft, come into this Old Street warehouse. Remember, sometimes he'd even lock us in. Some of this gear was so. I mean, pushing food through the letterbox, McDonald's through the letterbox. Yes, it did. So you ain't getting out. Anyway, you have fire hazard, and so we, and these canvas bales are coming in, which is about the size of a room, probably the room that you're in, and packed. So these would get opened, this ton of gear would come out, and it would be graded. That was our job. And then it would all be, some of this gear was wartime stuff, the old MA1 flying jackets, these wartime jumpsuits, beautiful clothes. Yeah. Those originals of those leather sheepskin, aviation jackets, the originals, not the copies. All this stuff was coming out, leathers from the 40s and 50s, original proper 50s 501s, and the real thing. These beautiful penny shirts, these plaid shirts, all this Ivy League stuff, beautiful things. Stuff that of the quality, when back in the day when Britain was still, after the war, was still rationed and everything else, and America had become the superpower. They dressed magnificently. All this stuff was high quality, and now we were seeing it, we were selling it, and I was wearing it. So I would go into the drama school that I was at in this gear, looking like the Fonz, probably.
Yeah.
In the days when we're talking like the Kids from Fame era. So my mates were still in they were looking like they were wearing headbands and leg warmers and looking like the Kids from Fame kind of, and there was Fonz in the middle of it. But my brother said with these but even like the Americans dressed so well in that period. Like some of this stuff was. I had a couple of service jackets, even just jackets that like a fella would wear to pump gas into a car at a petrol station somewhere in the middle, and it was beautiful. This and it looked like a Harrington, but like an original. Beautiful. Problem with this gear is, like my big brother says, you couldn't put it down because it would just disappear. You could never check it. I tried. You could never check it into a cloakroom. It wouldn't be there when you got back, sort of thing. It was happy days indeed.
Well, here we are, a second location and a second ramble, and the numbers selected for us this time are
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And that means the subject, the subject though is Determinism and Indeterminism.
Okay.
Right.
Is there a working definition there you can see on your little cue card?
There isn't, but this is where I might turn to Alan and say, Alan, determinism and indeterminism.
Well, determinism is the principle that because determinism is the principle that nature is fundamentally causal. So everything is dominated by cause and effect. And if you take that to the logical extreme, everything you do is done as an inevitable result of the thing that has caused it. So you could argue if you believed in a determinist universe, you could argue that the Big Bang set the initial conditions of the universe, and everything that has happened after it is a necessary effect of the initial conditions of the Big Bang. So there's no such thing as free will. We don't make choices. It's all just what happened at the Big Bang playing itself out until the end of time. Indeterminism, presumably being, I don't know, I've never heard the word indeterminism, but I assume it's the opposite, that things are not determinate and you can make worthwhile choices.
Over time, then, which has tended to hold sway, which is, in the human race. I mean, what's currently the thing? Are people still favouring determinism?
Well, it's actually been one of the big theological questions, obviously, because the question arises if you believe in a monotheistic religion like the Judeo-Christian religion, where God is all powerful and knows everything. The question arises: how can God know everything and we can still have free will? Which, according to the Christian tradition, we do. And there's a conflict between those two things. So that's been a big religious issue for hundreds of years, certainly in the Christian church. The question as to how science has approached it all got a bit complicated at the start of the 20th century because of the rise of quantum mechanics. And obviously the thing about quantum mechanics is that cause and effect don't necessarily hold sway at the quantum level. So quantum mechanics kind of gave determinism a bit of a kicking, because you could get effects in quantum mechanics that didn't necessarily have a cause. You just
seemingly random effects.
Seemingly random matter popping in and out of existence, that sort of thing. So, although on a macro level, a classical physics level, a Newtonian level, you could still argue that things were deterministic. When you get down to the quantum level, it's not actually that simple. There is.
And as far as our own, you talk about free will. Then, as far as us humans in our societies, with our constitutions and with our judicial systems and with our forms of, punishment and reward and everything else, that must have been scrapped over then for eons. Precisely because of what am I trying to say? If everything is determined, then how can I be guilty of something that I did, or some system that I followed, or some behavior that I, how can you punish me for something which clearly I have no control over?
If it's predetermined by God already, yeah. So the number of people who've been punished for say heresy or something over the years. I mean, how could you then say, well, that's not God's responsibility because I was allowed to do it, and it must have been preordained to an extent?
When we were children, we went to Roman Catholic single-sex schools, and they were pretty. I think they were quite. They were all in on this kind of thing, in trying to. I mean, Catholicism still was then. I think back in the 60s, at least where we lived, it was. Now I realise it was kind of perhaps the last knockings of it, of the potency of it, but. We were told as children, if you were brought up Roman Catholic, you were told about mysteries, divine mysteries, even as kids. And I remembering it, I could be remembering it wrong, but it seemed to. Now even thinking about it, thinking about those days, it seemed to be an end, or a line that you didn't cross. You don't question. After that, look, stop asking those questions. The kind of question that even a child would a curious child would want to ask. How can you say? What do you mean? And we were told that there are so many divine mysteries, and this is how they did it. Really.
Tony, of course, who was also raised Catholic, knew the word for this was compatibilism. That's the theological term. The question of free will and divine omniscience is compatibilism.
Compatibilism?
Yeah.
Never heard that till today.
No,
so,
I remember.
It sounds almost innocent.
So was the view, Paul, that you had growing up from education then, was it that you did have free will, but it was what you did with it that mattered?
I can't remember the questions themselves, and as you got older, and you were seemingly trusted with more info, or even some of these mysteries. I think I can't remember the detail of that now, but I can remember the spirit of it, and the spirit seemed to be, and in the end, I think it became the thing that probably drove most of us, even semi-educated, half-thinking people away from. Well, it made you walk away from it, was the idea that here in this place, here in this world, you needn't agitate, you needn't complain. There's no need. We've got it all sorted. Don't muddy the waters. I remember, for example, just one little thing. I remember this church at the end of the main road near where we lived. It was the church that my dad would go to, my mum and dad went to, and the nearest church to us. And it was this mid-Victorian, blackened, wasn't pretty, but it was ours, Anyway, but it also it happened to stand right next to the Central Hospital in Liverpool. And anyway, forget the year it was. I was probably in an early teen, but still going to church, and the priest stands up in the pulpit and says, okay, listen, this week's news, they're going to knock the church down because they need to make a little circular round so the ambulances can do the thing. And that was it. And then he moved on to so it was, and as a kid you felt like going, whoa, stop, hang on. Why? Can we not stop? But even on this, particularly on this matter, it was like no, it's done. It's a done thing. You needn't. You're going to a better place. Seemed to be the spirit. There's no. You see what I mean? This is how it was done. This is how this is how we were inculcated. That there's no need to be political even. This idea that, listen to me now, I sound like that early teen. I probably still am, but you're just when you're an adolescent, and just when you're in that mood, and just when you feel like, sticking your hand up, and just when you feel like complaining, and just when you feel questioning, like I say, you're told, no, it's all sorted without you. You're not going to get a memo. You're not involved. You're going to a better place. It was that kind of vibe. And maybe that was just peculiar to that bit of Liverpool in that decade, but it was just a way. It was a way of doing it. But most of us couldn't stand that. Yeah. And in the end, I was probably typical, and I just said, nah, this isn't working. This is lousy. To be discouraged to be party political. Liverpool at the time was, it was quite lively, and there was stuff going on, and and you were suddenly you'd soon be old enough to vote and that kind of thing. Anyway, so it all clashed. And I can remember walking away, and even as I was leaving, this parish priest, who incidentally is still a friend 50 years later, I remember him saying to me, we're having this conversation, he said, Paul, don't just swap one ism for another one. I remember him saying that to me. I can't remember the rest of the conversation, but I can remember him saying that. Whatever it was, socialism, whatever he was thinking. Anyway, but that was the spirit. Whether it was, the word, but it was certainly the spirit. That you were being led, you were being fed, and you were being looked after. So there was no need to, and you were definitely other ranks. There was no way any one of you was ever going to be, to make a decision. That was what it was like. That's what it felt.
Yeah. One of the things that it stuck with me from Tom Baker's autobiography, because of course he was raised Liverpool Catholic as well, and there's a line in it where he talks about going into a church and seeing that the priest had left his cigarettes on the rail by the confessional. And he just notes the brand, and he says, Capstan Fort Strength, nothing but the best when the poor are paying.
Yeah. Tom's still got that side of him.
Yeah.
Every now and again, I've seen it down the years. I haven't spent that much time with him, but to spend any time with him, you get a glimpse still of that. In another walk of life, Tom could have been, I don't know, he could have led a shipyard or, charged a barricade kind of vibe. He's a fighter, Tom, I think.
Well, here we are, third location and a final ramble for us. And the numbers are
7, 8, 3.
783, 783. And the subject is music for single voices. Music for single voices. Going back to what we said about school earlier, Paul, about that need to, experiment and show your individuality. I remember at school joining the choir, which everybody, I was insulted for terribly, but I think I did it primarily because I was the only boy in the choir, and I adored the attention, I have to say, of all that. But then my voice broke, and after that, the ability, I was a wonderful little soprano, but then my voice broke.
Did they not then make you an alto? Didn't you just go to the altos then and stay with them?
Well, no, my voice broke kind of drastically.
Did you have no?
It went from soprano, and then it wavered for about 6 months, and then it went down there, and
it broke in installments.
It did. It went bum bum bum, and that was it then. So something I used to love. I mean, again, I remember singing in a performance of Mozart's Requiem, and my granddad watching me, and I loved that whole thing of singing. And then one day I just suddenly couldn't do it anymore, and I was told, could I mime? God, that broke my heart. Absolutely, I know that broke my.
Well, like Milli Vanilli. It was the Milli Vanilli question.
Yes, just like that.
Well.
Yeah.
Were you at a Catholic school too? Were you at?
No, I mean, coming from Liverpool, you'll know it. I was at King David, but where you either had to be Jewish or in my case musical. So I got in there on the grounds of playing the violin, and which I was sort of made to do. So it wasn't a Catholic school. So I had that strange upbringing where I was introduced. I was a Baptist family, but going to a Jewish school, but on the grounds of musicality. And in the back of my mind thinking, but I think I'm an atheist. It was quite a strange combination.
What's a fantastic combination. But the music that you sang, so presumably you sang Bach and Mozart, and you sang masses, and I'll tell you, we were the same, and it's been one of the real joys of our lives. I think that somebody got us along the way when we were little, with choir and music, because that was really, really fantastic. We where we were in the middle of Liverpool. Again, it was a parish thing. You had a Catholic parish, so you'd have the three schools. The parish was still strong, so we're talking about the 1960s, strong enough that there were 4 priests, Catholic priests. Which if you know anything about the Catholic Church, there's 1 priest for every 4 churches. Never mind 4 priests for every church. So it was still packed in those days, and that was the point of it. The church was the point of it. So we were all in the choir. And really, I know my brothers would say the same. Look no further for theatrical roots. That's where it comes from when we were small children. Singing these masses, being on the every Sunday you'd be next to the service. It'd be a little choir, a place in. We went to a church called St Anne's. It was again mid-Victorian church. Which had I forget what you call it. Anyway, I've forgotten all the terms. But anyway, we took part. And what's more, every year or couple of years, we even got to travel. The first time that we ever got to travel was because we sang in these choirs. A 9-year-old, 10-year-old, the first time we'd go to these conventions in Europe of these thousands of boys' choirs. So what's not to like? Suddenly your world literally opened up, and all the time you're singing Mozart. I'm old enough to remember when the Catholic Rite, that is RITE, was still Latin. There was still a Latin Mass. That didn't change until the mid-60s, around 66 or 7. So when we were at school when it was still in Latin, and we were singing in Latin. Of course, we didn't understand a word of it, but to us it just sounded fantastic. Part again of this mysterious vibe, this beautiful and genuinely awesome vibe that they got you with from when you were little. was this beautiful music in this fantastic foreign language. I can distinctly remember when it changed. I must have been about 7 or 8, and we came in one Sunday and the priests were speaking in English, and it was ludicrous. It sounded. I can even remember like the faces of the kids I was with going, was that it? Is that it? Is that what it means? It was so prosaic, and it sounded, I don't know, it just sounded awful. But we still had the music. And, you know, sometimes there'd be big set pieces. We sang at the Philharmonic Hall. You know, my brother Mark and I, we soloed there. And, you know, what's not to like? It was, I was 10 years old, 11 years old. Like you were saying, our parents were there, family would come. And these were probably the happiest times ever of anything.
Oh, yeah.
What are we talking about? Music for single voices.
Yeah.
Actually, that's not a bad story, because there's a Mozart piece, one of the Laudate Dominum. I think there's more than one, but one of them, a famous one, we sang at the Philharmonic, and and it's got a big choir. Choir comes in, and, you know, for 2 minutes towards the end, but it involves a boy soprano singing this beautiful tune, and towards the end there's this long high, well, for argument's sake, let's say it's a high D, but anyway, I could reach the note. I was a good soprano, but I couldn't sustain it because I was a small child. It went on so Mark and me took the note together, and I began it, and he would end it.
Wow.
Anyway, there's a memory.
Yeah.
But as we're talking about music for single voices, but, you know, and we had this choir, so there'd be 200 people on the stage, and then we'd do a bit of Handel, and then we'd do a bit of Bach, and then we do, you know, and you're talking about inner city kids, you know, with no other musical training. There were no instruments for us. There was no, you know, and then we'd go on to schools where, you know, there might be, but at that time it was all vocals, it was all singing, and it was this beautiful, famous, you know, the best of the best music, and in a way, that starts you off. You know, I think, you know, there's something about the beauty of that. And the indestructible beauty of that, I think, that never leaves you. I can hear that music now, and I'm instantly back. You know, the way only music can do you. You know, Madeleine, and you're there, you're in that room, or you're. But what's more, you know, I still feel thrilled to hear it. Didn't even know the names of the things we were singing, and every now and again I don't know, I'm scrolling through, or some YouTube will come up, or I'll hear from I'll be outside of a record shop, and it's playing, and I've got to go inside, you know. So we, you know, for single voices, I remember the feeling of soloing, and being trusted as a child to solo. It's a big deal. Remember that feeling? You felt the same, you know. It's a pressure. And, you know, other kids like you, no doubt, were, you know, you were competitive, and there were other kids who would certainly have done it if you'd have called in sick, you know, so there was all kinds of vibes going on, but remember that feeling, and that feeling of having you were 10, 11, 12 years old, of having that noise behind you, the noise of a choir with adults in it. Yeah. And a half orchestra or a full orchestra playing in a proper hall, and it's you, and you're not mic'd, and you're
I think that the memories that provokes even now, and like you, I did a few things at the Philharmonic Hall. I got to lead an orchestra when I was 8 in short pants. I was the only person in short pants, but I remember now, nearly 50 years later, I remember the thrill of that still. And some of the music, you're right, it still sits there. There was the Dies Irae. I had no idea what the hell that meant, but my God, it meant the world to me.
It hardly mattered. It didn't matter.
It didn't matter at all. But, and I suppose, thinking back now as someone who wouldn't say I was spiritual in the conventional sense, I remember the feeling of spirit, of that. There was something magical. There was something otherworldly about being there and giving that performance in this language.
Newman.
Yeah.
That's what it was. You know, the idea, it did a lot of the heavy lifting, I've got to say, as I remember, in the place we were then, at that time, you know, that it was the real thing. That was the thing. You know, all of the sermons and all of the, you know, the other stuff that, and the awkwardness and what we were talking about before, you know, any, you know, theological arguments or discussions about politics or anything else was all just, it didn't matter. When this music kicked off, that you were saved. You were, you know, and the beauty was the point. That was the point of it.
Yeah.
For its own sake. And I can only remember that with, you know, still with love and fondness and having seen what it did for us, to little mates of mine, you know, it was the best thing that we had actually, in a lot of ways at that time as children, was the music, you know, definitely.
I mean, there's a real danger that working class kids these days are losing out on that because church attendance is much lower than it was, and the state system has not stepped in terms of music provision in schools.
No.
You know, the arts is getting worse all the time.
It seems to be getting progressively worse, yeah. And you know, there's no, I don't know. Maybe we could talk about this for hours, but it's there's more than a false economy going on there. You know, you can't justify running that kind of provision down. There's nothing that justifies it. There's no argument you can make, in my view. When, you know, like we were just talking about now, the bang for your buck in terms of confidence, in terms of, you know, just humanity, what's the word? You know, it's unity, atmosphere, you know, just sheer thrill, happiness. You know, you remember that feeling anyway? Even just the physical thing of singing your head off.
Yeah.
Changes your molecules. You can't feel the same after that. For hours after, sometimes for days after, you feel better. There's something, I don't know what that is. I don't know whether now, you know, it's ever been, I don't know if anyone could name it, but it's, you know, it's true. Anyone that's ever, you know, singing teachers know it's true. You know, you go to singing teachers, voice teachers, and even just, you know, the act, say, of preparing or doing breathing exercises and then singing your head off. Even if you're not a singer, just the very act, the fact of going through it, makes you feel better.
You see it every weekend on the football terraces.
Completely. That's part of it. Unless you're poverty chanting, in which case we don't want to talk about it.
True.
Unless you're Chelsea supporters. Even if you're poverty chanting in Latin, you're not getting away with it.
Well, here we are back in the shed. Our rambles for now are ended. And Paul McGann, thank you. That's actually been fascinating. That's been such a lovely ramble. And you're someone who, of course, worked with our lovely president, Drowning in the Shallow End. I think it was a Scream 1 production. What do you remember of Tony?
I really remember. I don't remember anything he said. I mean, for money. I mean, I don't remember him. I don't remember the scenes we did. Why should I? It was so long ago now, but perhaps they weren't even that memorable. But I remember his presence, his unique presence. I remember him turning up. I remember the first time we were together. Must have been some read through, and I can just remember the easy feeling instantly with him. We quickly worked out, I remember, that he and I were born in the same week. So it was, you know, that feeling when sometimes, if you're with somebody who's almost exactly your age, there's there can be a kind of ease. You've sort of come up with the same things. You hear the same thing. You say the same thing. There's a kind of shorthand perhaps a cultural shorthand that you have. And Tony and me just fell in really quickly, perhaps because of that. I just remember that. I remember how beautiful he was physically. He was really beautiful. He wasn't the only beautiful person in the room. There was a couple of other beautiful people, but maybe that was the point. Hal Lindis came. Hal was in it. Hal was a guitar. He still is a guitar player, a musician. Hal had been playing with Dire Straits, and Colin, the director, had got him in. I think, what's the story? I haven't seen it since we did it, but I think Hal was meant to be. He was a visiting American, but he was meant to be a kind of angel figure. And Hal was Hal was a conceivable angel. The guy was like absolutely, he looked like a Botticelli, and Tony was very beautiful. Anyway, I remember that, and so it was a happy time. And Tony just being, in the downtime that we had and the bits in between, and we shot it on film, so there were lots of bits in between, in turnarounds, him telling me things and sharing things, and of course you couldn't help notice. Well, I couldn't help notice just how generous he was, but how smart he was. He was but he was instantly the smartest person in the room. But he wore that so lightly and so generously that you couldn't help love him. He was just like, I like people like that. I've never been the smartest person in the room, so I've tended to gravitate, if I can, try and make friends with whoever it is, but with him, it was easy. It was easy. And he seemed to get it. And Colin Gregg, wasn't it? It was Colin Gregg. He worked in such a way. Colin directed. And I suppose the thing was written in the same style that you never felt that you were being directed anywhere. There was kind of almost a hands-off, almost a distance approach. You were just, I don't remember him ever saying much. You just got on with it. And Tony seemed really good with that. Happy days, happy memories, actually. Of him. I didn't see a lot of him. In fact, I think our children were babies then. We moved out of London. And so I just lost touch with him. But those weeks that we were together were really fond. Lovely. A good way of working. Well, and lovely person.
Well, listen, thank you so much, really, Paul. It's been lovely to have you along here, and thank you to everybody at home for listening. And, of course, we really hope that you enjoyed this week's meeting of the Rambling Club.
As you know, the club meets every Friday, but if you'd like to get in touch in the meantime, here's how you can find your fellow members.
Tony's official website is at www.tonyslattery.com, and you can get in touch on the contact form on that website.
We're also on Twitter at SlatteryLive. Please feel free to use the hashtag TSLC to discuss any of this week's topics.
I can be found on the remnants of Twitter at Paul Carmichael V, but these days I'm on Blue Sky, and you can find Tony Slattery official on Blue Sky as well.
And Tony also has an Edwardian Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/the Tony Slattery.
And he's on Instagram at Tony_Slattery_official.
And how would anybody seeking out the guest president find you on social media, Paul?
Perfect. They wouldn't. They wouldn't. There was a time, lads. There was a time. Have you got 10 seconds and I'll tell you the story?
Go on.
Yeah. I was on social media and then I read this book. There was an American scientist called Jaron Lanier wrote a book. He's written a few books actually about the web. He's a bit older than me. Anyway, he wrote this book and it's called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. It's more of like an extended pamphlet. You can read it in one go. And I did. And I got off all the social media that night. I realized that the way that he was describing all the pitfalls and all the kind of average kind of user that was in worse danger. It was me he was talking about. about me. I was most prone and credulous and everything else to the worst side of it, the worst excesses of it. So I got off. So no, you can't find it.
There we go.
Alas, but believe me, I'm happier.
I can believe that. Yeah. But if people want to join the Rambling Club for themselves, Paul, how do they do that? Paul Carmichael, not Paul.
Well, what they do is they head over to www.patreon.com/Slattery Live. The Rambling Club is open there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we'd be delighted to welcome you there. You can head over there and find all sorts of little perks, and you can hear episodes 4 weeks in advance and see lots of pictures of our wonderful Tony and clips as well. So head over to www.patreon.com/Slattery Live.
So please do get in touch by any of those methods. We'd be delighted to hear from you. And where you get your podcasts, since we've been talking about music for single voices, why not raise your single voice by leaving us a lovely review or 5 stars?
That would be lovely. And we will be back next Friday at 5 to 5 for another ramble. But until then, it's a goodbye from myself, Paul Carmichael. It's a goodbye from my colleague, Mr. Alan Lear.
Goodbye.
And it's a goodbye from our very special guest president. Thank you so much, Paul McGann.
What a pleasure, thank you. Goodbye, folks.
You have been listening to Tony Slattery's Rambling Club with our special guest president, Paul McGann. He was accompanied by Stephen Frey as the voice of the bingo machine. Acting President McGann was assisted by Paul Carmichael and Alan Lear. The music was composed and performed by Michael Livesley and Andy Frizzell. Silly voices are by Michael Livesley and the show concept is by Paul Carmichael. Our producers are Stuart Morris and Alan Dibing and the show research is Sula Carmichael. The show producers are Erika Lear and Mark Hutchinson and the program was edited by Harry Carmichael. Our executive producer is Chris Castle, and the series executive producer is Mark Strickson. Tony Slattery's Rambling Club is a Fanfanitel production.
Goodbye, and thank you for listening.